organization I was with was really big on the e-collars. At the time I was in the Marine Corps, I did not handle dogs. I did have a friend who was a handler, and I remember, I was learning so much about this tool, but they were not doing anything with the remote collar. And I later came to find out, honestly, for good reason. This is a really great tool, but we don't want to be messing dogs up, and you can actually do that if you introduce it the wrong way. Some dogs aren't right for that. So I learned a lot of very valuable things with the remote collar, how you can achieve really amazing control. Just get our dogs to the next level, and sometimes a lot faster than we think we could. So the remote collar is great, but there's a time and place for it. I also learned a lot of bad methods, and I'll talk about some of those today. I've seen some terrible things done with the e-collar. And so when I was with this organization for many years, I learned a lot of good things and bad things. And over the last 14 years of me doing this, my philosophy and how we use remote collars on an everyday use with dogs, I want to be able to share that with all you here today. So we'll go ahead and move forward. Class goals that I have, by the way, confidence in being able to introduce your remote. You have no idea how many individuals I've come across, even canine handlers that want to be able to introduce this system correctly to their dog. They want to know step by step of the way. And it makes them nervous, and I understand why. I've seen it introduced incorrectly, so it's really important that I want you guys to have that level of confidence if you're going to be introducing the remote collar by yourselves. Second thing is problem-solving issues with your current canine. So this is something I see a lot of, actually, where a lot of handlers will come up to me and they've had a lot of issues with their dogs based off the way previous handlers used it with their dog, the way they learned it, etc. I'll be going into that as well, and then we're going to finish up with a demonstration with this dog here. I'm big about asking questions, so if you all have questions at any point, just raise your hand, I'll get to you. I'm going to ask several times. I want to make sure it all makes sense. Again, my goal is to make sure that you understand how you could do this yourself. If you get a remote collar and you want to go through the process and get things started, this is how we're going to be able to do that. So we'll go ahead, with that being said, we'll go ahead and move forward. Class. Question that I always ask my clients coming to me, whether it be a canine handler or if it is someone who comes to me with a dog and they want to use the remote collar, why? Why do we use the remote collar? Well, there are several different reasons for that. I'm going to go into each one as I charge my laptop here. I don't know which one's going to what. I want to make sure not wrong one. But we'll keep moving on while she's looking away so we can plug and sit. It can increase the liability of having a hands-free approach. I love that. Honestly, going from using the leash all the time and then having to use the remote collar, I really love that because it gives handlers that approach to do other things in that meantime. When we have a remote collar, it's hard to go back to using that long line. Sometimes we have to, but I love being able to have a hands-free approach. Consistency with our commands, and it's really amazing. We get our attention from our dogs from 5 feet or 50 feet away. In moments that really matter, in moments that don't matter, being able to have consistency with commands is really important. Same thing with response time with their dogs. I think everyone here can think about their dogs, and we give them a command, sit down, whatever the case is, boost, and the dog takes the time getting into position. For some of my dogs, I really don't care how fast they get in or out of position, but when it comes to safety, that's important. When we're doing bite work with the dog, safety. There have been a couple situations where I've gotten bitten because the handler fumbling with the remote collar, they're not sure how to use it, and they told me they did. So a lot of situations I've come up with it, but faster response is what we're gonna be able to accomplish with using the remote. And last here, I put faster results. I put a little star next to it, and here's why. We can get faster results, but if we can do it correctly. So I've seen trainers that have used a remote collar, they've got nice results very quickly by using the remote, using a lot of compulsion. So that's what this is, right? They're doing a ton of compulsion, getting what they want out of the dog until they achieve it. What does that do though? Stresses the dog out. For me, it's gonna stress myself out. I'm not gonna do it to the dog, but I've seen that done before. So I say fast results, yes. Given the right dog in the right circumstances, absolutely, we're gonna be able to accomplish that. So just something to keep in mind when we're using our remote collars here. Moving forward. Pre-e-collar introduction is really important. To me, the age of the dog is number one thing. I had a handler not too long ago come up to me. His previous canine passed away, and it was time for him to get a new dog. He got a puppy, Dutch Shepherd. He was about 5 months old, and he brings me his e-collar and wants to start using it with his dog. Yep. I didn't do that. I didn't feel comfortable doing that because he did not have the relationship with the dog. It was simply just him wanting to go ahead and get that done. So we can get those fast results I can talk about. We don't always want that. Okay. I see I plugged that in, and unfortunately, I didn't want to be able to unplug the wrong one. Hit something and it came undone. So that's why I talk about the age of the dog and maturity does matter. Some dogs I'll get them, and even after a couple of months, we may start the e-collar. Prior equipment use, prong collar and the slip leash. I'm sure we're all familiar with both of those. What those do, those both create some level of pressure. I would say the majority of dogs that come to me that we're going to start introducing that remote collar, if they've already done prong collar work, it's really beneficial. They start to understand it much faster because they understand the concept of pressure and release, right? Pressure of the prong collar goes on by plus pulling on it, right? Goes away the moment they get back into position, or whatever the case might be. So that's why I tell people prong collar usage beforehand can be helpful, or slip leash. So if you're all familiar with the slip line, putting some pressure onto the dog and then releasing it, right, is another pre-e-collar introduction if possible. I already touched on this one just for a moment, but the relationship with the dog matters. Like I said, if someone comes to me with a young dog they just got, even if it's older, even if the dog, I got him at 2 years old and I didn't put an e-collar on him for months because the relationship does matter. I don't want to harm that relationship because for my belief, my benefits of trying to get something done faster. I've seen it happen time and time again. We good? You're good? Awesome, thank you so much. So some things to keep in mind before we get started, or again, this is for your knowledge in case you're deciding to introduce a remote collar to a new dog you have. I'm really big on choosing the right equipment. There's so many different pieces of equipment on the market. I'm going to go over some of my go-tos and how we set them up and all of that. From point A to point B, okay? So, choosing the right equipment. I talk about this one a lot. Quality equipment, I compare to cell phones a lot. Many years ago, we kind of remember, or you've seen cell phones like we have here in the top right corner, this right here. Big, bulky pieces of equipment. They weren't super reliable, but they worked. And below is a piece of equipment as well, as you can see that one right there. That's an old piece of equipment right there. It is a night and day difference between what we have today. I know a lot of handlers that have been passed on equipment, and although that can be nice, saves the handlers some money, the department some money, the issue with that is we don't want to see something too outdated because every few years these good remote collar companies are making slight changes to their models, making things better and more proficient. Not a ton. Sometimes it's just having longer range. Maybe it's a new model to fix up some issues that we've seen before in the past. So there's some things to keep in mind. That's something I'm really big on, making sure that we have quality equipment when we're working. When I work with a quality piece of equipment, what I am also I'm not just talking about battery life, the range of it, but the stimulation is one of the most important things. Here to the left, quality equipment should give you tons of levels of your stimulation. So we should slowly escalate. So that's what I have on the left here. The quality equipment, we have tons of levels, slow escalation up. Think of a ramp, right? Poor equipment has these big jumps in our scale of stimulation. So we're going from like a 5 to a 10 to a 15. With some dogs, we'll need that fine adjustment right in between, maybe 2.5, for example. We can't do that with a poor piece of equipment. So So look at that smooth escalation. If you get a quality piece of equipment, it's gonna have that on there. I'm gonna recommend and show you all those ones right here. All right, let's start with this one first. I see this happen a lot. I even had a can handler come to me with this model right there. And he's like, well, he had spruced it up, I'll be honest with you. He put a strap that he found, like a nylon, nice biothiene strap, I should say. It looked nicer, but just because you put those bells and whistles on doesn't mean it's a better piece of equipment now. None of these are good, but you'd be surprised how many individuals come to you with this because they get on Amazon, it's a special, I paid $40, I paid $30, $20. It's incredible how many are out there, but these are all trash. I would not recommend any of these. One thing you notice on here, it says 99. That one says 88. I myself have personally tested these pieces of equipment. There's not 99 levels. Once you get to about 4 or 5, there's no more. It's the same stimulation time and time again. Battery life on these are terrible. These for me would be if I'm just wanting to solely correct the dog. Again, some people want to do that, but when you read about these things online, you know, when people are buying them off Amazon, they're reading all these really nice details that you would see in quality pieces of equipment. However, again, don't waste your time. I don't know how many people are disappointed have come to me with one of these. I've had to say, sorry, I'm not going to use that piece of equipment. It's no good. These are my 3 go-to, and there's more as well, but these are my 3 go-to. The first one here being the Ecol Technologies one on the left right here, the can handler model. That's a really nice system. It's got great range. It's specifically made for harder dogs. It's going to give you more stimulation levels than some of the lower models they have. They have a lot of different options to choose from. The one on the right, the Dog Trail, the Arctic model, I really like that one too. Had a lot of success with that one. That's another great option. Dog Trail also has different models out there as well. That's just one I prefer if I was going to use the Dog Trail. But that being said, the K9 handler model has 100 levels. The Dog Trail has 127. Now, why 127? I can't give you an answer on that, but I can tell you is that it's meant to, there's more range because of that smooth escalation. Same thing with the Ecol Technology, but 100 true levels, I would say. And Sport Dogs. Sport Dogs is another big one that I used to use that one a bunch. I like that one. That's a great system. For some of the Canon handlers, though, you're not going to get that range. I'm going to talk about how you can get that range here in just a moment. But again, they have a good system for what they're worth. These are other models that you're probably familiar with and may not be familiar with. Talk a little bit about them. Like Garmin Tritonics, that's a nice model as well. I do think it's almost an overkill, though, for a lot of handlers. Because some of the ones I just showed you can get you that same range. It's waterproof. I mean, there's a lot of great things that both these systems have. A lot of camera handlers I've worked with do carry that system though as well. The one to the right, you've probably seen this before. The vendors here for them with Martin systems. Those are good collars too. It's just a matter of finding out what you like, what works for your dog. But one of these quality pieces of equipment, they're going to last a long time. They come with great warranties. I'm not here to sell you on any of these, but I can tell you that the one I personally have had for years, very little issues, battery replacement, and that's been it. So just some things to keep in mind. In fact, this one to the right, why I brought that one up, is you could actually put a remote collar from Ecol Technologies or a dog truck, and you can attach it to that one right there. So you're actually just using the collar. And what that does is space out your stimulation so you don't have it just with one area. Some dogs really benefit from that, which we'll be discussing here in a little bit today. So, old equipment. Again, we talked about handlers passing down old equipment. I think it's great, but just some things to keep in mind. I personally talked to Ecol Technologies, and they told me after the first year, the battery life has known to decline. Not by much, but it has declined. Like I said, I replaced my battery in my system already, but keep that in mind, because you think it has a good battery life, it's flashing green, and then it dies within that day or that session. Another thing I've seen with older pieces of equipment, even equipment 2, 3, 4 years old, the buzz response is inconsistent, and what I mean by that is you press it 5 times, but the dog's only feeling it once or twice. So keep that in mind. If you have an old piece of equipment, usually you're going to get, if you get one of these brand new, they come with a piece of like a tester, so they tell you it'll flash when it's going off, or you can put it in your hand and feel it on a low level. Most of these collars have stimulation, and those have vibration. And I've had some where the vibration works, but the stimulation doesn't. And you have to make sure that both, well, for me it's going to be stimulation, but just because you press the vibration doesn't mean the stimulation is working. So you probably understand what I mean there. The upgraded antenna for longer range. Not many handlers understand in this, but you can actually put an antenna on one of these collars and give you a mile, half mile, more range if you need to. So it goes from, I think the ET300 starts at a half mile, you can put an antenna on there and give you a mile, or even a mile and a half to 2 miles. So keep that, and most models, the ones I showed you, do offer that availability, and it's a $20 antenna that gives you extra range if your dog's gonna be out that far. What people don't understand about the antenna, it might tell you a mile, but that's a mile straight without any obstruction between me and the dog. I had a dog some time ago, and he was out in the woods, and I was using it, but there was hills, and doing it down here in the bottom, like most people, they'll hold the remote down here, right? I could not find this, I couldn't hear him. I knew he was in this area somewhere. I'm pressing the remote, and then I remember, that's right, the range only effective if we bring it high like this. So it's a half mile remote collar, I should say. Bring it up like this, I had high level on this remote, and I hear the dog, right? Now I know where he's at. But it did not work down here. It has to be going up high like this to get all of that range, especially when there are obstructions in the way. Like adding an additional antenna or getting one that gives you that extra range, you're not going to have to be doing this. You're going to be able to find your dog. So moving forward, setting up your equipment. So again, I want to make sure everyone knows how to properly introduce to your dog. Big part of that is how we're going to set that up. This is my go-to set, the ET300 and the 800. The 800 is the K9 model, like I mentioned. I'm going to use a traditional strap in the beginning, but I will change that. I'll explain why in just a little bit here. Long points. The majority of dogs I work with, when we're doing e-collar work, they're going to be, shepherds or mals or working breeds. I always put those longer points on there. Even if it's a lab, put the longer points on it. I want to ensure contact. And I cut the strap. I always cut the strap, and here's why. Because the dogs sit there and try to scratch at it, and it takes away from training. They might feel stimulation, and they're feeling this, and they're scratching at it, and it drives me crazy, but also the dog's not learning that moment, right? They're thinking too much about that. So I cut the strap almost right away. And then I set the remote to consistent mode. Most remotes that you're gonna get, the ones I mentioned, are gonna have options, whether a nick or consistent. Either it'll be on the button, or you can manually press it on the remote itself to get that, okay? So that's how I start off when I'm introducing a dog. That's my setup. That's what I do before I even place it on the dog. Proper placement, again, you can already see this dog here and where it's sitting up on the neck. The question I get a lot, I'm going to get into a little bit more of this, is when it's set up on the neck like this, does it have to be right there? It can be anywhere between the left ear and right ear. What we're trying to do is make sure that it's making good contact, and it's going to be most effective for our dogs, and it gets more sense of area, of course, between left ear and right ear. I see some trainers that place on the back of the dog's neck. Okay, why is that? That is for directional pressure. Most dogs move away from pressure, so we put it on the back of the dog's neck. I don't, by the way. I'm just explaining to you why you might see that. If I want to get the dog to lay down faster, I use a remote. Pressure helps the dog lay down faster. Do you need it? No, I've seen it, and I've done a lot of times without it. That's why occasionally you see trainers put it on the other areas of the dog. For example, heel position. If the dog's on the left side of me, and I want to keep my dog closer to me, I'm going to have the e-collar on the outside to help keep pressure to put the dog in if I have to, if I need to. So, again, not something I would necessarily do, but this is one of the reasons why I see it move around. A proper placement should be high on the dog's neck between left and right ear. The next thing I'm going to do, again, this is for a green dog that has not used a remote collar before, I'm going to look for an initial response from the dog. What that might look like is I put it on the dog, like I mentioned, snug. You should be able to fit about 2 fingers underneath that collar, 1 to 2 fingers. If it's not snug, it's not going to make contact. I'm looking for the dog acknowledging it without a command. So I tap the button. I want to see the dog might look down. These are the common disease. Dogs will look down. Some dogs will scratch at it. Other dogs offer behavior. I've imported dogs before and used a remote collar and done some work with them, and they go into position. Maybe they used it before in the past. Maybe they've been corrected to get into a sit or a down. Sometimes, especially when we're getting green dogs from vendors, you press that button, all of a sudden you see them offering something. Okay, it tells me they're acknowledging it. Okay, that's all we're looking for right now. No command should be used, and this is about attention, not discomfort. If I wanted to correct the dog, it'd be at a much higher level, right? This is not for correction, it's using it for attention. The reason being, if I start off as a correction, it's always going to be viewed to the dog as a correction. And last thing I want to do is get that dog, hurt that relationship somehow, because the first thing I do is strap it in your neck and I blast you with it. I say these things because I've seen them, but the way I would be introducing it, the way I'm teaching you here, is this. Again, looking for attention first, not any kind of discomfort. Will we in the future? Yeah, potentially, absolutely. We'll talk about more of that too. I always mark my strap, if I can, with a piece of tape, or in this case, the silver Sharpie. The reason being is consistency. If I put it on this tight today, and tomorrow I have it backed off, well, that 15 is not going to be the same level, right, to the dog. He's going to perceive it or feel it differently. So it's really important that in the beginning, we mark this. Once your dog gets conditioned and understands stimulation, you're absolutely fine. You can go ahead, and I like to use other pieces of equipment, which I'll go over those today. In fact, my dog has one of those bungee straps. I love those. But in the beginning, we don't know exactly where it needs to be in the dog. Let's have them understand it first and not have a bunch of inconsistencies. So getting started, again, we talked about equipment setup, where the placement is. Now we found an initial training level, which was what I saw here, the dog acknowledging that initial training level. Getting started with the very first section, no matter what the dog's doing, whether it be dog for police work, can work, law enforcement, or a dog I'm using for everyday pet obedience, this is my first go-to exercise. It does vary. There are two of my go-to, but this is, I would say, 95% of the time the one I go with. Okay, I'll explain to you step by step how it works and why. Is silent recall, right? This to me is a gateway exercise in teaching the dog the concept of pressure in release. Pressure comes on, and it goes away by the coming back to us. Why do we do it silent? We want to disassociate ourselves. I always do this. I've done this for many years. And I had a dog I was introducing the collar to, and he was just kind of floating around our office. Again, I don't like to do this near the handlers or the owners for the first time either. Like, I want them to see them, be present, but I don't want the dog next to them when I find their level or doing this exercise. So for example, the dog was kind of in the corner of my office, and I pressed it, and he had been scratching at it. It wasn't making great contact as he moved it around a little bit. So I'm going up, going down. End up needing some special points to make contact, but what happened when he was in the corner over there, one of my little bench I have for equipment, he felt that, he jumped. And so he didn't want anything to do with that area of the room, right? Is what we noticed. But can you imagine if we put it on, the first thing we said was spike, and we would have pressed it, right? And it had been too high, now he's associating that with us. Instead, he associated that stimulation with him being in that area of the office, and he didn't want to go to that office area. But by the end of the training session, he understood it, and he was running back to the owner. With the stimulation, us using food, he was able to get it great. But that's a great example of why we don't use a command or the dog's name in the very beginning. I'm going to go through this using a piece of equipment I have here, a tone box, so you guys can understand this a little bit better. I'm a very visual learner, and although I'm going to speak on this, it's nice to show everyone as well. So I'm going to talk briefly about this, and I'm going to give you an example with this, and then we'll move into some more things. But I always like to start with a short distance using a leash to guide the dog. So I have the dog at the end of the leash. I have a remote collar. I don't use a command until we see the dog returning consistently with stimulation. We definitely want the dog always to be away from us. Sometimes we have to toss a piece of food so the dog runs away from us. If I'm using an area of the office where they want to go explore, great. If not, outside works great as well. Again, just talking about using the food, tossing in front of us, and marking on the behavior. Real fast, touch on that. I'm not sure if you guys are familiar with marker words. I do use them with daily training. Now, a marker can be a clicker, but that's an extra piece of equipment we're going to have on us. I typically don't use the clicker unless it's to be something intricate that we need to teach. But the majority of the time, it's using yes as a marker word. So that's our bridge of communication. I use the stimulation, the dog comes back, and I say yes right away. They know they made the right behavior, and I can mark in that with food. Food or toy reward, I prefer the food for higher reps, high reward history. Doing it for, I don't know how many times I've heard this from clients. They'll come to me, oh, my dog learned how to sit. Just took him 5 tries, and he knows how to sit. I'm like, no, he doesn't know sit. He He understands the concept of what sitting is, but he doesn't know it. Try that outside. The dog's not going to listen, right? Because he doesn't 100% understand. He definitely doesn't feel obligated to do it. There are 3 phases to our training. We have teaching, learning, generalization, generalizing that command, going from outside to inside the house or park, wherever we're going to be applying this command towards, so that we're generalizing command happening everywhere. And last is obligation. Doesn't matter if the dog's in front of me, 50 feet away from me, the dog should feel some sense of obligation to come back to me. We use the remote collars to build that sense of obligation. So, again, I'm going to always use food if I can. If not, we can use a reward through a tug. There have been quite a few dogs I've worked with, especially more the greener dogs that come to me that are doing sport work or police work with, and tons of toy drive, tons of ball drive, but they may have some food drive. Well, that's fine. We can still work on that. It's all about proving the stimulation and making sure the dog understands. Like, that is the number one thing. What I want to see is if the dog's in the corner, without a command, I tap it, the dog should run over to me. It's not forever. This is just so the dog understands how it works. I'll give you an example. Let's see if I need to move this slide or not. I'll talk about commands here in a minute, but let me give you an example with the remote collar here. I kind of hold it up to you to do that. Sharply. I use this tone box a lot when I'm introducing the remote collar with my clients because they can hear my timing and when I'm pressing it. It gets louder the higher level I go. So I love being able to use this and show people like in real time, especially if I have a dog I'm working, how I'm utilizing it. We're talking about pressure release, and I'll give you an example. I'm going to use my dog here for a moment. I'm going to leave him laying down, but we're going to reverse roles here for a second. All right? If I was a dog and I needed him to come back to me, in the beginning, I'm going to lower this down here. I'm pressing stimulation, the dog is feeling it. One step, and I release. And I'm back there, kneeling down, and I give the dog food. But again, we want that reward history. So I let the dog come back out to the end of the leash again. I let them eat the food. Stimulation turns on. Moan one step, and I release. There are some other dogs that you might be familiar with your dog, a little bit more stubborn, a little harder to work with. I'm going to keep that stimulation on until they get all the way to me, and I turn it off. This depends on the dog, and depending on the dog, I'm either going to continue to use consistent stimulation, again, very low level, or I'm just going to go towards what we want to get towards, is this. Quick tap, the dog comes running back over. That is my goal by the end of the session. I would say the majority of dogs I work with, within an hour session, giving the dog breaks, they will understand this needs to come back to the owner. So again, large distance here, once the dog really understands it, tap, the dog is running back over towards me, right? Verbal affirmation, I don't know how many times I'm talking to handlers, they don't get it, verbal affirmation, they see the dog doing it, they just sit there, quiet. You gotta let the dog know he made the right choice. So if I tap that button, the dog comes running back, boy, let him know he made the right choices. The remote collar is very similar to teaching one of us a new language, right? You have to immerse yourself and you have to do it multiple times for you to really understand it and grasp that language. So keep that in mind when we're doing this. The next question is, always, we want to make sure we're adding a command to this. Recall. Everyone does this a little bit differently, so keep in mind this is the way I do it. It doesn't mean the way you have to do it. Other instructors are going to tell you differently. This is what I found to be most effective. There's always a reason why. One thing I talked to an officer last week, and she was telling me, she's like, you know, I saw these dogs being worked, but no one explained to me why they were doing it. So she sent me a video, and I go, I'll tell you why they're doing it. But it also frustrates me because when I was a new trainer, and I was being taught things, I would ask the trainer teaching me, and I would ask him, why are we doing this? Well, because he never had an answer. Now, did it work? Absolutely, but I'm the kind of person who understands why. Why am I studying my dog right now? I couldn't answer those questions. Yeah, I saw results. So I always tell people there is a why. You should always understand that why, because as handlers, you're also trainers. So, go moving forward with this. I say the recall, quickly followed by stimulation. For example, I use the name a lot. I'll say spike, use that for example. Spike, followed by a quick stem of the remote here. just like that. Spike, spike, right? Then we start to offset that a little bit more as we move forward. So again, we can use consistent taps. Even though I'm using the command, I say the dog's name or I say come, doesn't mean I may not just hold all the way down. You might tap it. It just depends on the dog. If we did our preconditioning work that you just mentioned previously here, the dog should come back fairly quickly when they hear that. The issue is most handlers have set their dog's name or command 100 times before they use the remote, let's say. So that's where there's some confusion lays with the dog. Why am I feeling this? You've said my name 100 times, now I'm hearing my name paired with this. So if we do that preconditioning work without the command, it definitely helps confusion if we see it with the dog. Again, the dog, I just kind of mentioned this too, the dog should not respond, recall, not confusion. I see that a lot when the dog feels it, they don't know what to do, they're not ready yet. Maybe we take a break, it could be a day or two, it could be later in the day. Put a leash back on the dog, go back to using food, okay? So you can always take a step back, we just don't want to move forward until the dog's ready. Multiple successful repetitions is going to be key. So additional commands. Before I dive into this, I want to make sure that I'm not going to be misconstruing anything here. Does anybody have any questions so far? None? Okay, cool. Well, if you guys do, let me know at any point. Adding additional commands. When I use the recall command, so that's 90% of the time, that is what I'm going to go with, is I'm going to be using the recall. As I get the gateway exercise to teach pressure and release. If the dog does not know that, what else could we do? One I use a lot is place, because it's an identifiable object. We want to help those dogs out. So if you're all familiar with, if you're not familiar with the place commands, you know, large box that we'll use. I'll use a very tall box to make it more identifiable for the dog. Add pressure turns on. Dog gets 2 feet or a foot on the box, I release. So again, I have the dog on leash. I hold that button down. The moment they get towards that box, I get 1 or 2 foot on, I release the button. That's another way I introduce the remote collar. Again, it's just teaching that concept of pressure and release. Before we want to add that command though, to any additional commands, I usually do 1 week, or if a handler comes to me and say, hey, for the next couple of days or week, 1 command with the remote collar. Otherwise, you're going to confuse the hell out of your dog. And I've seen that. I've seen so many individuals in one day try to offer 4 commands to their dog using the remote, and they're good at 1, because that's one they already understand very well. We want the dog to be what we call clear-minded. And so if we start applying the remote collar, we're gonna see some confusion in our dog, right? We're gonna see some conflict. And so to avoid that, I don't do multiple commands the first day. We always try to wait a couple of days or a week if we can. The dog really understand it. The same concept applies, pressure and release. So, you know, let's say I want the dog to sit. You know, the dog's up here, I'm gonna, pressure comes on, bump comes down, I'm gonna release that button. They're standing like this, pressure comes on, pull up on the leash, and release the moment they sit. And then I'm going to layer in that command that we've been using, right? Sit, extend, turning that off. Our goal will be slowly moving into a single tap or nick consistently. I'm not having to hold it down as much anymore. I'm just using a quick tap, and the dog's responding. Positive punishment, negative punishment. I want to talk about that. So we have our 4 quadrants of training. Positive reinforcement or negative reinforcement, positive punishment, negative punishment. So if I'm adding something into the equation like food, right, positive reinforcement, or negative, I'm taking away food. With our remote collars though, we have the positive punishment, adding the remote collar to get you to do what you want, what we need you to do at that moment. And negative punishment is going to be taking it away. I like to get in that area eventually with our dogs. And you'll see that today when I'm working with my dog, is that if I tell him to do something, I'll let you know if I'm using the remote. I don't want to back myself into a corner where I feel like I have to always use it. Like I mentioned when I first started teaching e-collars, the company I worked with, they did some things I wasn't really happy with. I mean, we put her on puppies, you know, 8, 9 weeks old. Now, did I see some results happen? Yeah, but here's the issue. I has happened so many times where they take the e-collar off, and the dog would not listen at all without that remote collar, because from a young age, he was always conditioned to that. So I want the dog to be able to do that by themselves before we go ahead and they need to understand if I want the dog to be able to do that by themselves, right? I want them to know what sit means before we apply the remote collar. So that way they're not becoming dependent on it. It's really important. But again, lastly, I'll hit on that one more time, multiple successful repetitions. Doing it 2 or 3 times is just not gonna be enough. It's really important to understand that. These are the common problems. So we kind of touched base on how I would introduce it. We're just going to get the dog to recall, that is it, right? And we can apply that same pressure release concept to other commands we want the dogs to learn. For me personally, I'm big on two: recall and stay. Stay doesn't mean like this, right? He's staying with me. I didn't tell him stay, I told him down. Stay is implied with down. So as I've been talking here, he's in that down because, again, it's implied. Now, with that being said, those are the two big ones I really require when I'm, especially when I'm working with my clients or with handlers. I want them to understand and make sure they can show me their dog doing that very well. Pressure, turning it off by coming back, but also by staying, right? So if you were to get up right now and I stem him, he should go back in the down position if I need to. So that's really important. However, this is something else that arises, are the common problems that people face with a remote collar. One, it could have been you taking all the steps you've taken here, I've taught you, and it doesn't work. You're having trouble. Or maybe you have a dog now and you're seeing issues, or you want to apply it in different areas. How can we do this? Well, I'm going to talk about that. These are, again, some of the more common problems that I see, the most common ones. Inconsistent collar contact. All right, that is one of the big ones that I see. And sometimes it's because the dog's coat. Sometimes it's the way they perceive it. I'm going to slide forward and talk about that. There are probably 15 plus setup options that I've counted that you can do with remote collars. And it's surprising how many handlers I talk to who have been using remote collars for years. They don't understand all these simple tools. I'll talk about how each one works, what they do. Of course, there are longer points here, but there's two things to know about these points. They do two things. One, obviously longer to make contact. Those are made out of titanium. The reason made of titanium is for allergies. There are a lot of dogs that get allergic reaction to the nickel that comes with stock with any of those remote collars. They come with nickel plating on the points, and that can cause irritation. I've had clients freak out. Oh my God, my dog's burning his neck. I'm not burning him, he has an allergic reaction. Let's go ahead and get these right here. They sell them in many different sizes. Short ones, long ones. Those are longer ones. If I have a dog, I had a shepherd one time I was working with, super thick coat. Even the long ones that come in the box weren't gonna help. I use those. Something here is a stem reducer. We're gonna talk about that one here in a minute when I go back to the other slide. But this one right here, this, the wings, that's somewhat new. Over the last, I think, 3-4 years, they've come out with those. For me, Collar Technologies, Amazon sells them now. Those are great for dogs. If we cannot make contact, I'll slide those on there. And they're about $15, $20. Usually come with a pack of 2. Really great. They have other options. Some are very long, some are very short, but that's gonna really help make contact. And then this last one down here too. If I have a dog with maybe a very short coat and I wanna spread out some of that stimulation, that one will help. Going back though, let's talk some more about that. Again, we just mentioned the inconsistent contact with the e-collar. Those other pieces of equipment, pieces you can put on your equipment, will definitely help you out to get where you need to be. Another one I see here is the dog moves away from the handler. What I mean by this is that I press the stimulation, the dog goes away. I have seen so many dogs do this where the remote collar is felt by the dog. Instead of coming towards us, they want to run away from pressure. And they learn to get really good at it. And that's scary, and I've seen that. Because most of the time, that's because a handler comes to me and says, here, fix my dog. I want to use it the way you're using it. And it's tough because they've used it in a manner that I would not have. And to counter condition that takes a lot of time. It's possible though, absolutely. So the dog moves away because they don't understand stimulation. So what are we gonna do, right? We're gonna put a leash on the dog. We're gonna help guide them using body language, kneeling down. So for the others that don't know, kneeling down is almost a universal body language for any dog. Kneeling down helps draw them towards you, okay? That is my go-to, pairing that with food, praise, or toy, depending on the dog. But I have seen a ton of the dog moving away, and it's typically the dog does not understand it yet. So we need to go back to the basics. See some dogs here that we call internalizing stimulation. What that looks like is you stem the dog, and he sits there, and he jerks his neck because he's feeling that stimulation from the remote collar. And it doesn't matter if you're on a 15 or a 50, the dog sits there and just takes it, just eats it. One, that has happened because some handlers have let the dog get away with something, but when I see the dog just kind of sit there and eat it time and time again, they don't understand pressure. And so we have to still go back and teach them how it works. I see this a lot happen in governments, actually. So the same concept, we're gonna put a leash on our dog. I'm gonna now use leash pressure to help you get rid of that pressure from the remote collar on your neck. Same concept, we gotta turn it on and release it. Once they make that one decision come towards us, we release it. You'd be surprised how fast dogs pick up on the fact that, oh yes, now I know how this works. It's like a light bulb goes off in their head. Like I said, we can always go back in our training. We just don't wanna go forward too quickly if the dogs aren't ready for that. A big one I see is the dog shuts down with pressure. And I'm gonna go forward with that actually because they shut down with pressure because even if we have one of these phenomenal collars, have great stimulation levels, the issue though, is it's still too high. So if you get right there, it's called a stem reducer. Stem reducer is gonna dumb your collar down. Let's say you have 100 levels, you'll probably only have like 75 or 50, depending on the model. You can apply this, and I wrote this down here. E-collar Technologies, their equipment they sell, and some of the ones I'm talking about on Amazon, they're interchangeable with Dogtra. However, Dogtra just came out with a new remote collar, and you're no longer able to do that, unfortunately. I believe it's because they kind of figured out that people were changing out piece of equipment, put it on theirs. It made it better, but now only some of the older models of Dogtra, like the Auric, you'll be able to do that with, but some of the newer models, you can't do that. But again, these are all very inexpensive pieces of equipment, so if the dog is shutting down with pressure, two things are gonna happen. If I press the button, I see the dog just shut down, I ask myself a couple questions. I talk to owners about this a lot too, even handlers. Like, we have a Dutch Shepherd right now, and he's pretty soft with their bone. He's a nice dog, he can be a really hard dog, but he's also very softy. And so we kind of ask ourselves, one, does he need it? Unfortunately, there's some dogs I work with that they're just not going to need a remote collar. It's gonna cause more harm, more stress than good. And it's tough, right? Second option is we can work through it. I have done it before, but again, I want to ask a handler, I'm gonna ask myself, does this dog need to be put through that level of stress in order just to complete something like that? Just may not be a dog where it's very rare. Again, we're coming from my background, we use it a lot on dogs. Again, I learned good things and bad things. I saw that we were able to do that, but I would say probably 9 times out of 10 it wasn't necessary. You know, we're gonna just do high levels of rep, long leash. Hey, this dog's just not gonna be capable of doing e-collar work. Now, sometimes that's because someone else has tried using the remote collar, they use it in a very negative way. The dog now perceives it as correction. Like I said, if you start with it as an attention tool first and not being negative, we save ourselves the option in the future for using it as a correction, because I'm not opposed to that. So, think about that. If we see dogs shut down, should we work through it? Can we? Yes, but is it worth it? We talked about the setups. This next one here is another huge one I see, especially in canine handlers. Even a lot of our sport dogs, we see this too, because we're working with dogs in a higher drive state. I'm going to explain this one, probably a huge, huge one that I get. A dog bites through pressure. All right, how do we get there? Why? What does that mean? Okay, so, for example, they use the remote, the dog blows right past that recall and gets the decoy. The ball, the tug, whatever it might be. If I'm working with pet dogs, oh, I use the stem, and they still try running after the deer. Well, you're putting your dog in a very high drive state. Prey drive being one of the higher ones, right? The highest one we got. So you put your dog in a high drive state like that, then we add agitation using a clatter stick, a whip or something, right? And then we expect our dogs to listen. I'll give you a couple stories of what I've seen and how we combat that. So, call-offs are huge. I know a lot of handlers have to do that for certification. And a dog, we were probably, again, probably 50, 75 feet away, and his dog was really good on recall. He could recall his dog from a tug. He feed through the tug, 25 yards, he could send his dog, he'd recall. Totally different though when you have a decoy in a suit, making noise, catch agitation, or even just being there. It drove that dog up. Why? Because the dog was always associating, in this situation the decoy wasn't even agitating the dog, but the dog is always associated decoy and agitation, too, just fired up, right? So he sends the dog, he tries to recall, he stems, it's going off, dog blows past him, that stem, he gets the bite. Two things happen in that moment. One, once the dog got on the bite, he released the stem, he's like, okay, right, he already got there. So now the dog realized what happened. This went away the moment I got what I wanted. Second, right, The dog got gratification, he got rewarded. And I was not the one running the situation. I wouldn't have tried it a second or third or fourth time like this individual did. So he gets the dog back, takes him again, let's try it again. Try it again, right? We're gonna be trying it. Let's try it with a leash on, right? Maybe we should slow things down. So I saw this handler 3 other times, and we got the same result every single time. Stem turned on, that's not high enough. Let's start with 100. So he goes all the way up to the highest level on the remote. Same deal. Dog screaming, he bites past it, gets his bite. So now the handler's frustrated, the dog has won multiple times. What do? That's a lot of times when we get the dog fighting through the pressure. This is another reason why I don't use the vibration setting. The vibration is not enough for the dog. And if we use the vibration to get them to do something, come away from something, yeah, it can be effective, but the moment the dog is able to get what they want and fight through the vibration is obsolete. Being in Austin, there's a lot of people who are very iffy about the remote collar, and they say, well, I'm gonna use it, but we have to use the vibration. And I say, nope, sorry, this is not the tool for you then, right? Well, why can't we use the vibration? Well, because the dog is at some point not gonna view it the way that we need them to. They're gonna outrun it, and they're gonna get hurt, right? So I tell them, hey, we're gonna use this stimulation. Because I can increase the level, and the dog should understand as it goes up, sorry, that was very loud. As it goes up, the dog should learn how to turn it off. Now, one solution that we do sometimes that is the double box, but is that necessary? I don't think so, but in some cases, absolutely. One of the shepherds that I had some years ago, he was a really nice dog, but his recall was best with double box. And single box, not so much, but I wasn't using a very high level stimulation. In fact, I was using a lower level stimulation with 2 boxes than I was with 1 box. The reason for that was because we have equalized pressure. You probably saw earlier the Martin system where it has multiple pieces of contact we can make for the dog. That's what's great about that collar, is that we can equalize the pressure, and actually it can be very effective. So then, if we don't want to spend all the money on a Martin system, not to say they're not great, we could also put a second box on the dog. I spoke with a handler at a couple conferences ago, and he double boxes his dog, not because he felt his dog needed to, but that was just something he did for extra safety, right? One collar went out, wasn't charged all the way, at least he has another one that's on there, right? Hey, it works, but this is an option. They can actually sell this double box system, so you could actually even buy this, or you get a second one and add it on. But the majority of the time when I hear people needing double box, I just talked to one of my trainers the other day, and he goes, I got to learn to be the canine handler model. I need something really heavy for this dog. And after seeing the dog, he doesn't need that. The owners think he needs that because he's not listening and he's a lot of dog. But once we can teach the concept of the pressure and release, we should be fine. But if not, we potentially move in that area of double boxing. But that's only with the situation I told you about with that dog running after it and getting self-rewarded for taking those bites. Yes, that situation, the double box actually helped because we can actually apply a little more pressure to the dog, right? But that was because the handler allowed that to happen so many times that we had to equalize. It wasn't about, the first thing the handler wanted to do when we did the double box, he's like, okay, what level I need to go to? Low, right? Let's not start with high, because the stimulation, you might know this already, the stimulation can actually get the dog even more fired up, right? It can frustrate the dog even more if we start on these really high levels of stimulation. So we start low, we go up, right? We use a line to help our dog out. We were able to achieve some really nice recall over the next couple of days once that individual knew, or the dog, I should say, knew, and the individual knew how to use it properly. Double box worked, but guess what did we do? Take that second box off, and the dog's now able to respond with just 1 box. It is about how we use that tool, not going with what he thought was going to be best, right? So different approaches for all of this. Any questions so far? All right, so I believe about finish up. I'm going to do a little demonstration here. Make sure you've got nothing else on here. So you guys can order a back issue of this, but everything I talked about today is actually in this issue of K9 Magazine, down in how to introduce the remote collar. In there, it's about 4 pages long, and I talk about step by step, just like I did here today. A lot of great information. Talks about from the very beginning step to the very end step. So always tell handlers, if you want some more clarification on this magazine has an article. Again, you can order a back issue for that. So, with that being said, we're gonna get started. Any questions? No questions? If you all do that have maybe more complex questions, I understand I've talked to handlers and their questions a little more complex that you can answer at this moment, just come up to you afterwards and we'll be able to, I'll be able to address and go over with you all. With that being said though, we'll go ahead and I'll demonstrate zero here for a minute. Yeah. Well, this is the one above it, I think. Go right up. Yeah, go. Oh, yeah. Yeah, we got some time. Maybe we got some more time. So. Perfect. So, give you a little bit of background on this dog here, Zero. You know, I got him at 2 as a green dog. Myself getting dogs for other individuals, I wanted a dog that was going to challenge me. And when I first got him, he was probably the more difficult dog I've had to deal with. But a lot of people I know would have right away gone to throwing that remote collar on. That was the last thing that I did, because I wanted to have that relationship with him. Getting this dog to let go of something was a pain in the butt. I mean, he did not want to let go. He was super possessive. I love it, but you wouldn't know that today, seeing what you saw previously. So we're gonna wait for these lights to turn on. We'll try to get started with that. I think he's at the press. Yeah, there we go. There we go. Awesome. Thank you. Thank you. Perfect. Thanks. All right. Perfect. All right. So I just want to give you a little bit of background on him real fast. I actually started with remote collar when I'm done. The first couple classes I did with him, it was very nice because I could show everyone step by step. I think the first class I did, or second class I did, it was very new to e-collar. So it was very easy for me to demonstrate in real time how I use the remote and the dog would come back to me.